Hi, I'm Dave Maynard, and this is the third week of the class, How Christianity Changed the World. This week we're going to be talking about slavery and about sexual morality. In relation to slavery, in what countries has slavery been practiced the most? Was it the U.S.? Well, it may surprise you, but the answer is no, it wasn't the U.S. Slavery has been a common staple in every society that ever existed, including Africa, Arabia, Greece, Rome, even in the American Indians way before Columbus. With very few exceptions, kings, pagan priests, and philosophers all approved of it. Slavery is not just about whites enslaving blacks. It's primarily about people enslaving other people. It exists today in many parts of the world, especially in the Sudan, where it's Muslims who are enslaving Christians and other Muslims. Now, Christianity was the first major religion that was against slavery. And the reason for that can be summed up in Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, verse 28, that says, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Because of Christianity, slavery has become, or had become, extinct by the 14th century in Europe. Unfortunately, it was revived by the British Empire's expansion in the 17th century, especially in the British colonies, yes, including America. But Brazil, that was a Spanish colony, had 10 times as many slaves as America. William Wilberforce, an English politician, finally ended slavery in England in the 1800s, and he did it because of his Christian convictions. Here in America, most of the abolitionist movement, in fact, 2/3 of the abolitionist movement in the mid-1800s, was made up of Christians and Christian clergy. While some Christians did defend slavery, and yes, there were some that did, they were mainly in the South, most of the denominations in the South didn't really defend slavery. They were pretty much silent on the issue, to their shame. But were there individual Christian pastors that supported slavery? Yes, there were. But that doesn't nullify the fact that most Christians were against it. And because of them, it ended here in America. Now, granted, it took a civil war. In England, it didn't. In England, it ended peacefully. But in all of the pain and suffering that American blacks endured during slavery, they were greatly aided by the presence of Jesus Christ in their life through the black churches. Now, this may sound kind of strange, but the slave masters that were Christian, they realized that their slaves were still people made in God's image who had redeemable souls, and so they made sure that the gospel was preached to their slaves. It sounds kind of strange, it is to us, but that's what happened. Christianity is not a segregated religion. It has offered itself without restriction to all peoples, classes, and nations. It's not limited to one people or one nation or even one empire. Slavery was first abolished in the Western world as a direct result of Christianity. Now, to those who disagree, answer these questions. Was slavery first abolished in countries where Christianity had a major influence or a minor influence? Where slavery exists today, does Christianity have a major or a minor influence in those countries? For those countries that still practice slavery, and yes, there are many of them that do today, which religion or political system is in place. I'm going to pass out this. It's called Some Prominent American Abolitionist, and on there it has a lot of Christians. Amazing. Somehow you don't hear about that in history classes. I'm not quite sure why, but there will also be some books and some websites that we reference all this from. Okay, now let's talk about the sanctity of human life. And the first thing I want to talk about is infanticide. Infanticide is the killing of newborn infants. Historical research shows that infanticide was common in many of the ancient cultures, the Greco-Roman culture, India, China, Japan, Africa. The North and South American Indians practiced it. The 12 tablets of Roman law support infanticide, as do many of the ancient philosophers like the Roman philosopher Seneca. In fact, large Greco-Roman families were rather rare because of this. Infant girls were especially vulnerable. In Greece, it was rare for a wealthy family to have more than one daughter. Polybius, a Greek philosopher, in fact, blamed the population decline on infanticide. Throughout the centuries, Christians have never wavered in their condemnation of infanticide, in part because of Matthew chapter 19, verse 14, where Jesus says, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." Christians have always called infanticide for what it really is: murder. The Roman Emperor Valentinian, sufficiently influenced by a Christian bishop of Caesarea, formally outlawed infanticide in the Roman Empire in 374 AD. As strange as it sounds, calls for this are going on today in America. Peter Singer, a professor at Princeton, wants parents to be able to legally kill their children up to 2 years of age. Yeah, that's really true. That's kind of creepy, because that's what King Herod did when he went to kill the baby Jesus. Now let's talk about child abandonment. Now, in America, we don't hear about this very much, but in the Greco-Roman culture, they practiced child abandonment quite a lot. In Sparta, Greece, when a child was born, it was taken before the elders of the tribe, and they decided whether it should be kept or abandoned. Children were abandoned for many reasons. There were economic reasons, just frustration in child rearing, things like that. But in all of the Greek and Roman literature, we don't find any guilt feelings over this practice. That's amazing. Clement of Alexandria, a church father in the later part of the 2nd century, condemned the Romans for protecting birds and other creatures better than its children. Now we can look at that today and say, oh, that's terrible. We would never do that. Yeah, we are doing that today. Remember the Save the Whale movement? What about PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals? I'm not saying everybody in those organizations supports the pro-choice position, but a lot of them do. And they will protect animals and mammals more than they will protect the unborn children. Christians did more than just condemn the practice. They actually took these children into their homes and they raised them as their own. This is one reason why the early Roman Church wasn't very rich. They expended a great amount of time and money raising these kids. When the Roman Emperor Valentinian outlawed infanticide in 374 AD, he also outlawed child abandonment. Christians saw child abandonment as a form of murder. The next topic I talk about is going to be very controversial, but we got to talk about it. It's abortion. The Greco-Roman culture had a very low view of human life, and while the Roman view of marriage started out actually pretty high, it quickly deteriorated. Countless Roman women engaged in adulterous sex, and when they became pregnant, they aborted the evidence. Plato, Aristotle, Celsus, and other Greco-Roman philosophers had no problem with the killing of the unborn. There was a little opposition to this, but it was very little. The Greek physician Hippocrates, which is where we get the Hippocratic Oath from, that doctors, well, they don't have to take it now, but for years and years they did take it. In there, he specifically says that doctors should not take part in an abortion. But that was very, very little opposition. Plato said it should be done to stop overpopulation of the state. Most ancient cultures practiced abortion. The early church's opposition to abortion, infanticide, and child abandonment really set Christianity apart from the pagan societies. In fact, that was a major factor in giving the Western world, so to speak, its high regard for human life. Again, the Emperor Valentinian outlawed abortion when he did the other things in the Roman Empire in 374 AD. I want to read just part of Psalm 139 to you. In verse 13 it says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." For those of you who have had abortions, yes, it is a sin. Yes, you did take a human life, but it's not the unforgivable sin. There is forgiveness in Jesus Christ, and I would beg you to seek that forgiveness. We do have a sheet that I'm going to hand out that talks about infanticide, child abandonment, abortion, and a few other things, human sacrifices and suicide, things like that. But another example of the sanctity of human life is the Gladiator Games. Now, gladiators fought not only other men, but they also fought beasts in the arenas. Thousands upon thousands of them were slaughtered during the 7 centuries of the games. That's about 3 times as long as America has existed as a nation. Now, these games weren't just held in the Roman Colosseum. They were held throughout the entire Roman Empire. In fact, the Emperor Trajan, who was emperor from 98 to 117 AD, celebrated his conquest of Dacia, which is a country that the Romans conquered, by hosting gladiatorial games that lasted 4 months. And they involved 10,000 gladiators with 10,000 beasts. Half of those gladiators died during those 4 months. The Emperor Titus inaugurated the Roman Colosseum in 80 AD, and in one day, 5,000 animals were killed and hundreds of gladiators lost their lives. Christians have always condemned and boycotted these games, and they've called it for what they were, murder. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, one of the 10 commandments is, "You shall not murder." Their opposition to this didn't go unnoticed by the Romans. They accused the Christians, as incredible as it sounds, of being unpatriotic. A Roman pagan was quoted as saying this about Christians: "You don't go to our shows, you take no part in our processions, you shrink in horror from our sacred gladiatorial games." That's incredible for us today, but that was standard for back then. The historian W.E.H. Leakey, who is absolutely no friend of Christianity, states this, quote, "There is scarcely any single reform so important in the moral history of mankind as the suppression of the gladiatorial shows, a feat that must almost exclusively be subscribed to the Christian Church." The gladiatorial games were outlawed in the Roman Empire in 404 AD. Another subject is child sacrifice. Wherever paganism has ruled, it is not uncommon to see human beings, especially children, sacrificed to pagan gods. Child sacrifices were very common in places like Canaan, which is Palestine. In 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 6, this is talking about Manasseh, the king of Judah, and it says this: "He sacrificed his own son in the fire. He practiced divination, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritualists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing God's anger." The pre-St. Patrick Irish sacrificed prisoners of war and newborns to the harvest gods, just so they could have a good harvest. It was also common among the pagan Prussians and Lithuanians until they became Christianized in the 14th century. The Aztecs and Mayans of South America also practiced child sacrifice and didn't stop until they were conquered by the Spanish. Whether it was human life as a fetus, an infant, or an adult, early Christians saw God as the creator of all human life. Job 121 says that. And only He could give and take human life. If we did it, it was murder. This view of human life was totally against the prevailing ancient view of life, especially the Greco-Roman view. The Roman Emperor Tiberius, who ruled from 14 BC to 37 AD, loved to see tortured humans thrown into the sea. The Emperor Caligula, who was emperor in the Roman Empire from 37 to 41 AD, once killed all those who served in his palace. He also dragged humans through the streets with their bowels hanging out. That's hard for us to imagine, but that's what the ancient world was like. So Christianity was introduced into that kind of world. And for centuries, Christians have fought against that. And it's really the only major world religion that continually fought against it. We're going to stop here. I think you can see that the ancient world was not only without much compassion, but their morals were extremely warped. We'll see you next week.